Well, what happens when a cop with a power complex meets a woman who outranks him in every way that matters? It started on a Wednesday night, late, just after 11 o'clock p.m., the kind of time when the streets of Toledo, Ohio are mostly empty, except for the occasional shift worker heading home, or someone like Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Wallace, driving through town after wrapping up a base meeting 2 hours south. She was in her government-issued black SUV, windows slightly tinted, nothing flashy, just clean, simple, and quiet. Like her. Adrian had been on the road for a while, humming low to the rhythm of the tires against the pavement, her mind already halfway home. She wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, wasn't doing anything unusual. But Sergeant Daniel Mercer saw something else. Parked just off Reynolds Road, he was tucked in his usual spot, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling through his phone. Bored. The shift had been dragging. No calls, no action. And now, here came an unfamiliar car. He tossed the cup into the passenger side and pulled out. The lights came on before Adrian could even register the cruiser behind her. She slowed down, blinked once, then pulled over to the side of the road. Calm, controlled, just like she'd been trained. The door of the patrol car slammed hard. She watched in the side mirror as a tall man approached, hand already resting on his holster, flashlight in the other. He didn't come to the passenger window. He went straight to hers. "License and registration," he said, no greeting. Adrian kept her hands visible, rolled the window halfway down. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" Mercer squinted, shining the light directly into her face. "You were drifting between lanes. Didn't signal. Looked like you might have been under the influence." She raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't." "License and registration," he repeated, louder this time. Adrian didn't argue. She moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into the glove box for her documents. As she handed them over, she added, "That's a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee." Mercer glanced at the ID and said nothing for a moment. "You military?" "Yes." He gave a small smirk. "Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was." His tone shifted, a little more aggressive now. "Step out of the vehicle for me." Adrian blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said step out of the car. I'm conducting a sobriety check." Her jaw clenched, but she stayed measured. "On what grounds?" "I've complied. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to know the reason." Mercer took a step closer. "Now you're refusing a lawful order?" Adrian didn't move. "No, I'm asking for clarification." He didn't like that. He opened her door himself. "I need you to exit the vehicle now." That was when she calmly, quietly turned on her phone camera and hit record. "Just so we're clear," she said, "this interaction is being documented." Mercer's eyes flicked to the phone. For the first time, a sliver of hesitation crossed his face, but he didn't back down, not yet. "Out of the car." Adrian stepped out, her posture straight. Not defiant, just firm. She didn't shout, didn't resist, but the way she carried herself, even in civilian clothes, told a different story. Mercer looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, a small voice in the back of his head asked, "What am I dealing with here?" But his ego was louder. He proceeded with the field test, making her walk a straight line under the streetlights like she was some reckless driver on a Saturday night. She passed. Perfectly. No slurring, no stumble, no hesitation. Still, he wrote her a citation for failure to maintain lane. Adrian took the ticket. No words, just a look. She got back in her car and drove away into the dark. But Mercer had no idea that ticket was going to show back up in a courtroom and change everything. Sergeant Daniel Mercer wasn't new to this. 15 years on the force had carved deep lines into his face and thicker ones into his sense of self. He'd been in everything from neighborhood standoffs to messy traffic accidents, and he'd earned a reputation, the kind that made rookies tighten up when he walked in the room. But Mercer liked it that way. He didn't ask questions. He gave orders. And in his mind, the badge meant control, authority, final say. Whether it was a teenager mouthing off or a frustrated driver asking too many questions, Mercer never backed down, and he never apologized. His precinct on the west side of Toledo knew what they had. A cop who'd do the paperwork, show up on time, and never hesitate. That also meant they knew he could be rough, sharp with his tone, quick to escalate, but nobody really challenged him. Not until that night. When he got back to the station after the stop, he barely mentioned it. He logged the citation in the system, gave a quick write-up. Failure to maintain lane, possible signs of impairment, no arrest made, and tossed the body cam in the charging dock like he always did. The video sat there for 2 days before anyone bothered to review it. In the meantime, Mercer joked about it in the break room. "Woman tried to pull rank on me," he said to Officer Diaz. "Flashed her government ID like that was supposed to impress me." Diaz raised a brow. "Wait, she was military?" Mercer shrugged. "So she says. Some fed with an attitude." "What was her name?" Mercer leaned back in his chair, popped open a bag of chips, and said, "Wallace. Adrian Wallace." Diaz's face shifted. "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Wallace?" Mercer paused. "How would you know that?" "She gave a lecture at the academy last year," Diaz said slowly. "She's not just military. She's high up. Runs logistics out of Fort Wayne, Bronze Star, 2 deployments. She's legit." Mercer scoffed, waving it off. "Don't care who she is. On the road, I'm the authority." But something about Diaz's tone lingered. That small note of caution, of respect. It chipped at Mercer's usual armor. Still, he didn't go back and watch the footage. He didn't think twice about the ticket. In his head, it was already done and buried. But it wasn't. Because Wallace had filed a formal complaint the next morning, not just with Internal Affairs, with the Office of the Inspector General, and she wasn't alone. The video she recorded had already been passed along to her legal team, and a copy was quietly making rounds through the military chain of command. Mercer didn't know any of this yet. He was back in his routine, responding to minor calls, barking at people during traffic stops, carrying himself like a man who couldn't be touched, because for years, he hadn't been. The system had protected him. Supervisors had looked the other way. Union reps had shut down complaints. And Mercer had come to believe the rules didn't apply to him the way they did to everyone else. But now there was someone on the other side who wasn't afraid. Someone who didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't crumble. She just documented everything, followed protocol, made one phone call at the right time to the right office. And she had receipts. But Mercer didn't see it coming until the envelope hit his desk, marked formal inquiry. Adrian Wallace wasn't the kind of person who made noise for no reason. She wasn't dramatic, she wasn't confrontational, and she sure didn't have time to chase down every small injustice that came her way. Not after 22 years in uniform, 2 tours overseas, and enough close calls to make most people fold. But this time, it was different. Because she wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about every young soldier she mentored, every civilian she'd seen mistreated without anyone to speak up for them, every woman, especially every black woman, who'd been forced to swallow their pride just to avoid making things worse. And she wasn't doing that anymore. Back at Fort Wayne, Indiana, Adrian sat in her office the morning after the stop, staring at her screen. She'd barely slept. Not because she was angry, though she was, but because the whole thing kept replaying in her head. The way he talked to her like she was nothing. The way his hand hovered over his holster. The way he tried to bait her into reacting. She knew the script, knew what could have happened if she hadn't kept her tone even, knew exactly how fast things could go wrong, even with the camera rolling. Her aide, Sergeant Daniels, poked his head in. "You good, ma'am?" Adrian looked up, expression calm but focused. "No, but I'm handling it." He stepped in, closed the door behind him. "I saw the footage," he said. "You want me to loop in the base attorney?" "Already done," she said. Daniels hesitated. "You sure you want to go public with it?" Adrian leaned back. "I'm not looking for headlines. I'm looking for accountability." And she meant that. She'd spent her entire career leading with discipline, with integrity. Her rank wasn't just something she wore on her shoulder. It was something she earned, through years of work, through decisions that affected lives. She'd commanded convoys across dangerous terrain, coordinated relief efforts after hurricanes. She'd been responsible for soldiers, supplies, and security across 4 different continents. But none of that had mattered when she was pulled over on a quiet road in Ohio. To Mercer, she was just another suspicious driver who didn't move fast enough when questioned. And the thing that ate at her wasn't just how he treated her, it was how comfortable he seemed doing it. That was the real problem. So Adrian made a few calls, first to JAG, then to the Inspector General's office. She attached the footage, filed the complaint. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth, backed by video, and let the facts stand on their own. By the end of the week, the story had started to circulate within military legal circles. It hadn't hit the media. Not yet. But Mercer's name was now attached to an internal investigation. The department's legal counsel had been notified. And Adrian, she kept working, kept showing up, didn't mention it unless asked. But behind the scenes, she was preparing something else. Because her lawyer had suggested that the stop wasn't just inappropriate, it might have violated federal policy, considering her government status in the absence of probable cause. And if it came to it, they'd go to court. Adrian didn't flinch at that. She welcomed it. But Mercer still didn't believe this would go anywhere. Not until he was told to appear in front of a judge. The envelope was thin. Nothing flashy. Just a plain manila folder with his name typed on the front and a return address from the Lucas County Civil Court. Mercer tore it open in the parking lot, half distracted, figuring it was just another traffic summons or departmental memo. But it wasn't. It was a notice to appear. A formal civil rights complaint had been filed. The plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Wallace. The charge, violation of constitutional rights during a traffic stop, including unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Mercer stood there for a minute, staring at the paper. Then he laughed, out loud. "No way," he muttered. "No way this sticks." But when he stepped back inside the station, the mood was different. His captain, Officer Redding, called him into the office. Door shut, blinds pulled. "Dan," Redding started, "we need to talk." Mercer sat, arms crossed. "About what? The lady from the other night? She's trying to play victim." Redding didn't smile. "She's not playing anything. Do you even know who she is?" "I don't care who she is. She got pulled over, acted smug, and now she's mad I didn't kiss her shoes." Redding leaned forward. "She's not just some random motorist. She's a lieutenant colonel, a combat veteran. Her record's spotless. Her connections are deep. And she's got the whole thing on tape. From two angles, yours and hers." Mercer scoffed. "So what, we just roll over, say sorry because she's got some stripes?" "No. But we don't pretend this is nothing either. You're going to court. And if this gets out, and it will, it's going to blow up." Still, Mercer couldn't shake the arrogance. "She didn't even get arrested. I didn't touch her. I was following procedure." "You were on edge, Dan. You escalated. You treated her like a suspect before you even knew who she was." Mercer bit his lip. For once, he didn't have a snappy response. The notice said the court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, word had spread across the department. Whispers in the locker room, sideways glances in the hallway. Nobody said anything to his face, but Mercer could feel the shift. He wasn't the wolf anymore. He was bleeding, and the rest could smell it. Back at her base, Adrian prepared too, but in a different way. She didn't throw press conferences or demand attention. She met quietly with her legal team, reviewed every second of the footage, and outlined her experience in exact detail. She was calm, collected, but relentless. Her lawyer, Delaney Price, sat across the table from her and said, "You sure you want to do this in court? It's public. It'll follow you." Adrian nodded. "Good, let it." Price paused. "Most people would have let it go." "I've let too much go already," Adrian said. "This isn't just about me." She wasn't looking for a payout. She wanted a public record, a moment that could be referenced, something that showed power didn't excuse behavior, and that silence wasn't the only option. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for every person who'd been talked down to, dismissed, or bullied behind flashing lights and a badge. And when the court date finally came, she didn't walk in quietly. She walked in wearing her full service uniform, badges, medals, the rank on her chest clear as daylight. She wanted the jury to see her, not just as a woman in a car that night, but as a human being who had served her country, respected the law, and expected the same in return. Mercer was already seated when she walked in. He turned, saw the uniform. His smirk faltered for the first time, but the real test hadn't started yet. Because when Wallace took the stand, the whole courtroom leaned in. The courtroom was packed, not with reporters, not yet, but with officers from both the local precinct and Fort Wayne's military base. Adrian's peers came in silent, respectful, dressed in uniform or business attire, seated shoulder to shoulder with civilians who had no idea what this case was really about. To some, it looked like a traffic stop gone wrong. But to Adrian, it was the boiling point of something deeper, something that had been simmering for years. Mercer sat at the defense table, stiff in his suit, face blank but tense. His attorney, Charles Brenner, leaned in and whispered something to him. Mercer didn't blink. He just kept his eyes on the judge. Then Adrian was called. She stood, adjusted her collar, and walked to the witness stand with the same quiet discipline she'd used leading convoys through dangerous zones. She didn't rush, didn't falter. Every eye in the room was on her. Her ribbons caught the light. Her posture demanded respect. Not because of how she looked, but because of who she was. The judge cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, thank you for your service. You may proceed." Delaney Price stepped forward, not missing a beat. "Lieutenant Colonel, could you describe the night of January 17th? Adrian spoke plainly. "I was driving back from a meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve. Around 11:15, I was pulled over by Officer Mercer. There was no erratic driving, no signs of intoxication. I was compliant. I asked reasonable questions. He responded with aggression. She kept her voice steady, no edge, just truth. He demanded I exit the vehicle without explanation. When I asked why, he repeated the demand louder. At that point, I turned on my phone to record the rest of the stop." Delaney nodded. "Did you ever refuse a lawful order?" "No." "Did you resist in any way?" "No." "Did you identify yourself?" "Yes. I informed him I was a federal employee and that I was driving a government vehicle." The courtroom stayed silent. No coughing, no rustling, just her voice and the soft scratching of pens on paper. Then came the playback. First, Adrian's phone footage, steady, clear, damning. Then the body cam. It showed everything. Mercer's tone, his posture, his hand hovering near his weapon, even when she was fully cooperative, the unnecessary field test, the dismissive attitude when she passed it. The jury didn't speak. They didn't need to. You could feel the shift in the air. Then came cross-examination. Brenner approached the stand with that careful tone lawyers use when they're trying to look respectful but dig deep. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, with all due respect, is it possible that Officer Mercer was simply following protocol?" Adrian didn't blink. "No." "Is it possible he was concerned for your safety or the safety of others?" "I was driving within the lines. I was sober. I was not aggressive. There was no safety concern." "And yet you recorded the stop. Why?" "Because I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't protection. I wanted an accurate record of what happened." Brenner nodded slowly. "So you don't believe officers should have discretion during stops?" Adrian looked at him and said calmly, "I believe discretion must be paired with discipline. That badge isn't a free pass. It's a responsibility." That line hit. Even the judge paused before asking the next question. Then it was Mercer's turn. He walked up to the stand, not to testify, but to watch as the footage played again, this time frame by frame. Every pause, every clipped response, every time he looked at her like she wasn't human. The prosecutor leaned in. "Sergeant Mercer, why did you ask her to exit the vehicle?" Mercer stiffened. "She looked evasive. Did she disobey any of your commands?" "She questioned me." "Is that illegal?" Mercer hesitated. "No." "Did she raise her voice, make threats?" "No." "So what made you escalate the stop?" No answer. "Sergeant Mercer, were you aware she was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army?" "Not at the time." "And if you had known?" Mercer's voice dropped. "I probably would have handled it differently." The room went quiet again. There it was. The truth, or at least a part of it. Not regret, just a slip of honesty. Mercer didn't see a person that night. He saw someone who didn't move fast enough, didn't speak the way he liked, didn't submit. And now, sitting across from her, with her rank laid bare, the courtroom could see it too. But the trial wasn't over, because now the jury had to decide what accountability really looks like. 3 days passed before the verdict came in. The courthouse was quieter this time. No military uniforms, no off-duty officers watching from the back. Just Adrian, her lawyer, and a few civilians who had followed the case out of curiosity. Mercer sat with his attorney, hands clasped, trying to hold the same blank expression he'd worn through the entire trial. But this time, his jaw moved slightly, like he was grinding his teeth without even knowing it. The judge, Cynthia Morales, shuffled the papers on her bench and looked out across the courtroom. In the matter of Wallace v. Mercer, she began, the jury has found in favor of the plaintiff. Mercer shifted. Adrian stayed still. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful stop and detainment. Furthermore, the court finds that the actions taken by Sergeant Mercer were not aligned with department policy or basic expectations of professional conduct. No one clapped, no gasps, just the flat weight of consequence. Mercer's attorney leaned in and whispered, "We'll appeal." But even he didn't sound sure. The judge continued, "While no criminal charges will be filed at this time, the plaintiff is entitled to damages totaling $35,000, and this decision will remain on permanent public record. Furthermore, this ruling will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for internal review and policy evaluation." Adrian didn't smile. She didn't pump her fist or celebrate. She just nodded once. Not to the judge, not to the jury, but to herself. She had done what she came to do. After the hearing, Mercer stood outside the courthouse, pacing near the bottom steps. Reporters had started to show up, not in big waves, just a few local outlets, but enough for him to look down and cover his face with a folder as the cameras clicked. He didn't speak, didn't make a statement. He just walked to his car and drove off. Inside, Adrian stopped in the hallway, pulled out her phone, and read the notification. "Verdict in your favor, case closed." Her attorney caught up to her. "You could have asked for more." Adrian shook her head. "It was never about the money." Delaney looked at her for a second. "You think it'll change anything?" Adrian turned toward the glass doors and said, "I don't know, but maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice." A week later, Mercer was put on administrative leave while an internal review was conducted. Rumors said he might be reassigned. Others said this was the beginning of the end for his career. Either way, the shield that had once protected him was cracked, and everyone could see it. At Fort Wayne, Adrienne returned to her duties like nothing had happened. She wasn't interested in being a hero. She didn't want interviews. She had work to do, people to train, missions to manage, responsibilities to uphold. But within her command, the message was clear. You don't always have to raise your voice to demand respect. You don't always have to break to prove you've been wronged. And sometimes, the quietest stance speaks the loudest. But even with the verdict behind her, Adrienne knew the fight wasn't over, because accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about what comes next. 2 months later, Adrienne stood in front of a room filled with young recruits at Fort Wayne. Most of them had only been in uniform a few weeks. Fresh faces, open minds, hungry to serve. She wasn't there to talk about combat strategy or logistics this time. She was there to talk about leadership and what it means when no one's watching. She looked around the room and asked a simple question. How many of you think a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up, some half-hearted, some confident. She nodded. I understand why you'd think that, but here's the truth. Respect isn't something you're owed. It's something you prove. Every day. Every choice. She let the silence hang for a second. Same goes for power, she continued. The badge, the rank, the authority. It's not a shield. It's a weight. And if you can't carry it with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. In the back, one of the newer soldiers leaned forward, eyes locked. Adrienne paused, then added, When I was stopped by an officer who forgot that truth, I could have yelled. I could have panicked. I could have let it slide. She looked around. I didn't do any of those things. I documented it. I filed. I showed up in court, and I told the truth. A long pause. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable, until he saw my rank, not just on my uniform, but in how I carried myself. That's the difference. That's leadership. The room stayed quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from disinterest. It was the kind that comes when something lands. Adrienne closed the folder in front of her and looked up. Lead with character, serve with integrity, and never forget, you don't just represent the uniform, You represent every person who came before you and everyone who'll come after." She stepped off the platform, not for applause, not for thanks, but because the work was already done. Let this story be a reminder. Authority without accountability is just a mask for weakness. Speak up, stand firm, and when you see wrong, don't turn away. Because silence is comfort for the guilty, but courage is protection for the rest of us.